The acid rain pelted the crumbling structures of what was once called Hope. 10 years had passed since the colony fell, its inhabitants consumed by virus that struck without mercy all except one man. Mark crouched at the entrance of his makeshift shelter, watching the caustic droplets create steam as they hit the parched ground. His weathered face, hidden beneath an unkempt beard, revealed nothing of the torment that lived within him. Natives of Xantos called him Silent Ghost, a creature of myth who moved through the forest without sound, who left footprints that disappeared, who watched but was never seen. They spoke of him around fires, voices hushed with reverence and fear. None had ever approached the ruins of the metal village, none except the small figure now stumbling through the rain toward the colony's broken gates. Mark narrowed his eyes. A native child with skin the color of the Xantosian dawn, a soft amber that seemed to glow even in the gloom of the storm. She couldn't have been more than 8 cycles old. Her clothes were soaked, her small body trembling, but determination drove her forward step by painful step. Something stirred in Mark's chest, an emotion he had buried beneath years of solitude. The child reminded him of Eliza, his own daughter, the way she moved, the tilt of her head. Memories flooded back. Eliza's laughter, her tiny hand in his, her final breath as the virus claimed her. No, he whispered, his voice from disuse. He retreated further into the shadows. The girl reached the gates and stopped, her eyes scanning the ruins. Ghost, she called, her voice carrying over the sound of rain. Silent Ghost, I know you're here. Mark remained still, hoping she would leave. Please, she cried. They took my mother, the Scalers, torn her up to the mountains. They say she can heal their chief, but they won't bring her back. Tears mixed with raindrops on her face. Please, mighty human, my mother was taken by enemies. Help save her. The words hung in the air. Mark closed his eyes, willing himself to remain hidden. This wasn't his fight. He had removed himself from the world of others, living only with the ghost of his past. And yet the girl slumped to her knees, exhaustion finally claiming her. The rain continued to fall, harsh and unforgiving. With a muttered curse, Mark emerged from his hiding place. He moved silently, as was his way, and scooped the child into his arms. She was light, too light, and burning with fever. He carried her to his shelter, laying her gently on his bedroll as he worked to bring her temperature down with damp cloths and medicinal herbs he'd learned to use. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness. Aya, she murmured once. I'm Aya. Rest, Aya, Mark said, surprising himself by speaking. You're safe now. When morning came, the rain had stopped, and Aya's fever had broken. She sat up, eyes wide as she took in her surroundings, the mix of colony technology and native craftsmanship that made up Mark's home. And then her gaze landed on Mark himself. You're real, she whispered. The Silent Ghost is real. Mark handed her a bowl of stew made from the blue-furred rodents that inhabited the plains. Eat, he commanded, then you'll go home. Isla took the bowl but shook her head. I can't go home without my mother. The Scalers came 3 days ago. They said their chief is sick with a shaking sickness, and only my mother's healing could save him. Her small hands tightened around the bowl. She didn't want to go, but they said they would burn our village if she refused. The shaking sickness. Mark felt a chill run through him. The symptoms of the virus that had wiped out Hope had started with uncontrollable tremors. His skin turns pale and he shakes so hard his teeth break. Aya continued, and there are blue marks on his neck like bruises. Mother says she's never seen anything like it. Mark set down his own bowl, his appetite gone. The virus, it had to be, but how? The virus had been contained to the colony. That's why the native populations had survived. Sarah had spent her final days ensuring the pathogen wouldn't spread beyond the settlement's boundaries. Unless something had disturbed the quarantine zone. Why did you come to me? He asked. Isla and LT Uncle GT's eyes were serious beyond her years. The elders tell stories of the metal village and its fall. They say one human survived, a ghost who watches over the ruins. They say he knows things that he's strong in ways we aren't. She leaned forward. I need someone strong to save my mother. Will you help me? Mark turned away, moving to the far side of the shelter. He hadn't ventured beyond the colony ruins in years. He'd sworn to never again involve himself in the affairs of others, human or native. His failure to save his own people, his own family, had broken something essential within him. Please, Aya said softly, she's all I have. Mark closed his eyes, seeing Eliza's face. She would be about Aya's age now if she had lived. He saw his wife Sarah, the colony's chief physician, who had worked tirelessly to find a cure until the virus claimed her. Too, he saw all the faces of those he couldn't save. The Scalers live in the northern mountains, he said finally. It's a 3-day journey on foot. Hope brightened Aya's face. Then you'll help. Mark moved to a storage container, pulling out items he hadn't touched in years. A hunting knife, a compound bow he'd crafted himself, arrows tipped with the poisonous sap of Xanthian fire trees. We leave at dawn, he said, not looking at her. Get some rest. That night, as Isla slept, Mark stood at the colony's edge, looking north toward the distant mountains. The virus had been contained, he was sure of it. Sarah had implemented protocols, strict quarantine, disposal of all potentially contaminated materials. How could it have reached the Scalers and in a weakened form? Something wasn't right. And the thought of the virus spreading again, of more deaths he could have prevented, pushed him forward more than the girl's plea. When dawn broke over Santos, painting the sky in swirls of orange and purple, Mark and Aya set out. Mark carried only what was necessary: weapons, water, dried meats, and medicinal supplies. Isla kept pace beside him, her small legs working double time to match his stride. Stories don't say you have a name, she ventured after they had traveled in silence for several hours. Mark hesitated. How long had it been since he'd spoken his own name? Mark, he said finally. My name is Mark. Isla smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. That's a strange name. Despite himself, Mark felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. I suppose it is. Here on Santos, as they traveled north, the landscape changed from the arid plains surrounding the colony to lush forests with trees that spiraled toward the sky, their bark a deep purple. Creatures scurried in the undergrowth, some familiar to Mark after his years on Xantos, others still alien. A flock of winged lizards, their scales shimmering like opals, took flight as the travelers approached. Day riders, Isla explained, pointing upward. They bring good fortune. Mark wasn't sure he believed in fortune, good or bad. His experiences had taught him that survival depended on Preparation and will, not luck. Still, he found himself watching the creatures until they disappeared beyond the canopy. By midday they reached a river that cut through the forest, a boundary marked between territories. According to Aya, the water flowed rapidly, its surface broken by jagged rocks. We need to cross here, Aya said, looking dubiously at the rushing water. Mark surveyed the river, calculating, it's too deep to wade, we'll need to find another way. They followed the riverbank for nearly an hour before Mark spotted what he needed, a massive fallen tree, its trunk stretching almost completely across the water. With careful maneuvering, they might be able to use it as a bridge. Stay here, he told Aya, then moved to test the tree stability. It shifted slightly under his weight but held. He made his way across, finding footholds in the gnarled bark until he reached the far side. Come, he called, step exactly where I did. Aya nodded, her face set with determination. She started across, her movements careful and precise. Halfway across, the log shifted suddenly. Dislodged by the current, Aya lost her balance, teetering on the edge. Mark's heart lurched. Jump, he shouted. Jump. To me. Aya hesitated for only a second before leaping toward the bank. Mark lunged forward, catching her arm before she could fall into the churning water. He pulled her to safety as the log was swept downstream. They sat on the riverbank, both breathing hard. That was brave, Mark said finally. Aya looked up at him, surprise evident in her eyes. You saved me. Mark stood, adjusting his pack. We should keep moving. They hadn't gone far when the ground beneath them began to tremble. Mark grabbed Aya's shoulder, pulling her close as he scanned their surroundings. The trembling intensified, and a deafening roar filled the air. Tenderfoot, Aya whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We need to hide. Before Mark could respond, the trees ahead parted as a massive creature burst into view. It stood on 6 thick legs, its body armored with plates of natural bone, its head disproportionately small for its enormous body, swung from side to side as it charged forward, blind in its rage. Run, Mark shouted, pushing Aya toward a cluster of boulders. They scrambled for cover as the Thunderfoot crashed past them, its footfalls shaking the earth. The creature's momentum carried it forward, unable to stop or turn quickly. Mark drew his bow, knocking an arrow. Stay down, he told Aya as he took aim at the beast's eye, one of the few vulnerable spots on its armored body. He released the arrow just as the Thunderfoot began to turn back toward them. The arrow struck true, embedding itself in the creature's right eye. It bellowed in pain, thrashing its head from side to side. Mark fired again, aiming for the same target. Second arrow missed, glancing off the bony plate protecting the creature's skull. The Thunderfoot charged blindly, crashing into trees and boulders in its pain-fueled rampage. Mark grabbed Aya and ran, seeking higher ground where the massive beast couldn't follow. They found refuge on a rocky outcropping, watching as the Thunderfoot eventually retreated, disappearing back into the forest with earth-shaking steps. You hit it in the eye, Aya said, all in her voice. No one from my tribe has ever managed that. Mark retrieved his remaining arrows. We were lucky it was already in a rage, not hunting. If it had been focused on us. He left the sentence unfinished. Aya nodded solemnly. Mother says the Thunderfoot is the voice of the land when it's angry. As the day wore on, Mark found himself observing Aya with growing curiosity. She moved through the forest with practiced ease, identifying edible plants and pointing out potential dangers. Her knowledge of Xantos was impressive for one so young. Your mother taught you about the plants, he asked as they stopped to refill their water containers from a clear spring. Aya nodded. She's the trib's healer. She knows all the growing things which can heal, which can harm. Pride shone in her eyes. She was teaching me too. Before the scalers took her. And your father? Mark found himself asking, though he wasn't sure why he cared. Isla's expression darkened. He died when I was small. A hunting clear's throat. Accident. She looked up at Mark. Like you, I only have one parent left. Mark froze. What makes you think? Your eyes, Aya said simply. They're sad. Like you've lost people too. Mark turned away, uncomfortable with her perception. We should reach the foothills by nightfall, he said, changing the subject. We'll make camp there. Their journey through the forest was interrupted by an unexpected hazard. As they passed through a clearing filled with beautiful crimson flowers, Mark noticed Aya's steps becoming unsteady. She stumbled, her eyes unfocused. Alas. Mark knelt beside her, concern etching his features. What's wrong? The flowers, she murmured, her words slurring. Mother says never to breathe. They're sent for too long. They make you see things. Mark cursed under his breath. The flowers were releasing some kind of hallucinogenic pollen. He quickly lifted Aya into his arms and carried her from the clearing, finding a safe spot downwind from the toxic blooms. Aya's condition worsened. She thrashed in his arms, fighting invisible enemies, calling out for her mother. Mark held her firmly, preventing her from harming herself as the toxin worked its way through her system. Look at me, Aya, he commanded, forcing her face toward his. Focus on my voice. Flowers are making you see things that aren't real. For hours Mark talked continuously, telling Aya stories of Earth, of the stars, of the colonies. Early days. Anything to give her a focal point beyond the hallucinations. Gradually her struggles subsided, her breathing steadied, and she drifted into an exhausted sleep in his arms. Mark didn't move, keeping vigil through the afternoon. Something protective had awakened in him, a feeling he thought had died with his family. This child, with her courage and determination, had somehow slipped past the barriers he'd built around his heart. As predicted, the sun was beginning to set when they reached the base of the mountains. The peaks loomed above them, harsh and forbidding. Somewhere in those heights, the scalers made their home and held Ayla's mother captive. Mark found a sheltered spot between three large boulders and started a small fire. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, a common occurrence in Xantos's extreme climate. Ayla huddled close to the flames, wrapping her arms around herself. Without a word, Mark removed his outer jacket, a patchwork creation of colony fabric and native materials, and placed it around her shoulders. Aya looked up, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, she said softly. Mark nodded, then tensed as a sound reached his ears, a low, guttural growl coming from the darkness beyond their camp. Stay by the fire, he whispered. Reaching for his bow, the growl came again, closer this time. Mark knocked in. Arrow scanning the shadows. Movement caught his eye. See a massive shape slinking between the boulders. A mountain stalker, one of Xantos's apex predators. Its 6 legs moved with fluid Grace its body low to the ground. In the firelight, Mark could see its blue fur bristling along its spine, its three eyes fixed on them with predatory intent. Don't move, Mark told Isla, his voice barely audible. The stalker circled their camp, assessing, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Mark tracked it with his bow, waiting for a clear shot. The creature feinted left, then charged from the right, its massive jaws opening to reveal rows of serrated teeth. Mark released his arrow, striking the stalker in the shoulder. It roared in pain but didn't slow its charge. In one fluid motion, Mark dropped his bow and drew his hunting knife, pushing Isla behind him. The stalker leapt and Mark met it head-on, driving his knife into the soft underside of its jaw. The momentum of the creature's attack knocked them both to the ground, stalker's weight pinning Mark beneath it. Hot breath washed over his face as the creature thrashed, trying to dislodge the knife. Mark twisted the blade, driving it deeper. With a final gurgling growl, the stalker went limp. Mark pushed the dead weight off him, retrieving his knife. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. It had been years since he'd faced such danger, since he had felt so alive. Ala emerged from behind the boulder where she'd taken shelter. You killed it, she said, awe in her voice. It was hungry, Mark replied, cleaning his blade on the creature's fur. So are we. They roasted stalker meat over the fire, the flesh tough but nourishing. As they ate, Mark found himself telling Aya about the mountain stalkers, how they hunted in packs during the cold season but alone in warmer months, how their third eye could detect heat signatures, making them exceptional night hunters. How do you know so much? Aya asked. Mark hesitated. When we first arrived on Xanthos, I was part of the exploration team. We studied the local fauna, trying to determine what might be dangerous, what might be domesticated. You came from the stars, Aya said, eyes wide. The elders say humans fell from the sky in a metal bird. Not exactly, Mark said, a small smile tugging at his lips despite himself. We came in ships, vessels designed to travel between worlds. Why did you come here? The question was simple, but the answer was not. Mark stared into the fire, remembering the hope and ambition that had driven the colonization mission. We were looking for a new home, he said. Finally, Earth, our original world, was becoming difficult to live on. Too many people, not enough resources, and you chose Xanthos. Xanthos was suitable. Breathable atmosphere, compatible gravity, diverse ecosystem. It wasn't perfect, but it was promising. Mark poked at the fire with a stick. We didn't know about the virus. Aya was quiet for a moment. The elders say the land sickened your people because you tried to change it too quickly, they say. The metal village angered the spirits. Mark had heard similar sentiments from the native tribes who observed the colony from afar. It wasn't spirits, he said firmly. It was a virus, a tiny organism that causes disease. It was already here in the soil. When we disturbed it during construction, it became airborne and it killed everyone. Except you, Aya said. Why didn't it kill you? The question hit Mark like a physical blow. Why? Indeed, it was a question he had asked himself countless times over the past 10 years. I don't know, he admitted. Some people are naturally resistant to certain diseases. Or maybe I was exposed to a weaker strain first, which gave me immunity. He shrugged. Your mother might know better. Healers understand these things. Isla nodded thoughtfully. she always says every plant, every creature has its purpose, even the things that seem harmful. Mark wasn't sure he agreed. What purpose had the virus served other than to destroy everything he loved? But he kept this thought to himself. As night deepened, Aya fell asleep curled beside the fire. Mark remained awake, keeping watch. The moons of Xantos, a single large satellite that the natives called the Eye, rose above the mountains, casting a pale blue light over the landscape. In that ghostly illumination, Mark allowed himself to remember Sarah and Eliza, the sound of their laughter, the warmth of their embraces. For 10 years he had pushed these memories away, finding them too painful to bear, but now watching over this child who reminded him so much of his daughter, he found a strange comfort in remembrance. Dawn brought a new challenge. As they prepared to begin their ascent into the mountains, Mark noticed dark clouds gathering above the peaks. Storm coming, he said, frowning. Mountain storms on Xantos were legendary for their ferocity. Aya looked worried. We can't wait. My mother has already been with the scalers for 4 days. Mark understood her urgency, but he also knew the dangers of the mountains. Will proceed with caution, he decided. If the storm gets too close, we'll find shelter. Agreed. Aya nodded reluctantly. Path up the mountainside was treacherous, narrow ledges, loose rocks, steep inclines. Mark led the way, testing each step before allowing Aya to follow. The girl proved surprisingly agile, scrambling up difficult sections with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat. They had climbed for several hours when a horrifying screech echoed through the mountains. Mark froze, his hand automatically reaching for his bow. Sky serpents, Aya whispered, pointing upward. Mark followed her gaze and saw them, 3 reptilian creatures soaring on Miu's wings that span at least 4 meters. Unlike the colorful day riders of the forest, these predators were a mottled gray, perfectly camouflaged against the stone of the mountains. They hunt in the high places, Isla explained, her voice quivering slightly. They can carry off a child. Mark nodded grimly. Stay close to the cliff face. Don't give them a clear target. They continued their ascent, keeping a weary eye on the circling serpents. The creatures seemed to be watching them, waiting for an opportunity. Mark knew they couldn't outrun the aerial hunters. Their only hope was to reach a cave, some other shelter before the serpents attacked. The storm clouds continued to gather, moving inexorably toward them. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. We need to find shelter, Mark said, scanning the mountainside. There should be caves. They increased their pace, searching for an opening in the rock face that might offer protection from both the approaching storm and the circling sky serpents. The wind grew stronger, buffeting them as they climbed. Their eye pointed to a dark recess in the cliff face about 50 m above them. They had nearly reached it when one of the sky serpents broke formation, diving toward them with startling speed. Mark pushed Aya against the cliff and drew his bow in one fluid motion. He fired as the creature swooped down, the arrow glancing off its armored hide. The serpent shrieked in anger, wheeling for another attack. Its companions joined the hunt. Clear's throat circling lower. Mark knocked another arrow, waiting for the right moment. The lead serpent dived again, jaws agape. Mark's arrow found its mark this time, penetrating the soft tissue of the creature's mouth. It reeled away, screeching in pain. "Run!" Mark shouted to Aya, pointing toward the cave. "I'll cover you." Isla scrambled up the path while Mark fired at the remaining serpents, forcing them to keep their distance. The first raindrops fell, large, heavy drops that stung where they hit exposed skin. Mark backed toward the cave, Boo still at the ready. They tumbled inside just as the storm broke in earnest, rain falling in sheets that obscured visibility beyond the cave mouth. The sky serpent screamed their frustration, unable to follow their prey into the narrow opening. "Good eyes," Mark told Isla, who beamed at the praise. Despite her evident exhaustion, the cave extended deep into the mountain, and its walls smooth as if carved by water over centuries. Mark produced a small light from his pack, a relic of colony technology that he had carefully maintained. "What is that?" Aya asked, fascinated by the steady artificial light. "A flashlight," Mark explained. "It captures light inside a small container so we can use it when it's dark." Aya reached out to touch it, then pulled her hand back. "Is it hot like fire?" "No," Mark assured her. "It's safe to touch." He handed her the flashlight, watching as she turned it over in her hands, examining it from all angles. Her wonder at something so commonplace to him was a reminder of the vast gulf between their experiences. As they moved deeper into the cave, seeking a dry spot to wait out the storm, Mark noticed markings on the walls, crude drawings that depicted humanoid figures with distinctive features. The figures had elongated limbs and rigged foreheads. "Scalers," Aya whispered, pointing to the drawings. "This must be one of their places." Mark tensed, scanning the darkness ahead. "Stay close," he warned. They proceeded cautiously, the beam of the flashlight revealing more drawings, scenes of hunting, of ritual gatherings, and disturbing images of what appeared to be sacrifices. Mark had heard stories of the Scalers' brutal practices, but had dismissed them as exaggerations. Now he wasn't so sure. The cave narrowed, then opened into a larger chamber. The floor was littered with bones, some animal, some disturbingly humanoid. In the center of the chamber stood a crude altar, stained dark with what could only be blood. "We should go back," Mark said, gripping Aya's shoulder. But before they could retreat, a sound echoed through the cave. Footsteps, multiple sets, approaching rapidly. The Scalers had returned to their sacred place. Mark doused the light and pulled Aya behind a large stalagmite, pressing a finger to his lips. They crouched in darkness as the footsteps grew louder. Light flickered at the entrance to the chamber, torches carried by tall, thin figures. The Scalers entered, 5 of them there, green skin gleaming in the torch light. They were taller than Mark by at least a head, with limbs that seemed too long for their bodies. Their foreheads protruded in ridges, and their eyes, 3 per Scaler, arranged in a triangle, glowed with an inner light. They dragged something between them, a body limp but breathing, Clear's throat. A woman, her skin the same amber tone as Aya's. "Mother," Isla gasped, the sound barely audible. Mark's hand tightened on her shoulder, keeping her in place. The woman was laid upon the altar, her wrists and ankles bound with coarse rope. She appeared unconscious but unharmed. The Scalers began a low, rhythmic chanting, circling the altar. One produced a knife, a crude weapon fashioned from bone, and raised it above the woman's chest. Mark made his decision in an instant. He knocked an arrow, took aim, and released. The arrow struck the Scaler with the knife, embedding itself in his shoulder. The creature howled in pain, dropping the knife. The other scalers whirled toward the source of the attack, their three eyes scanning the darkness. Mark pushed Aya deeper into the shadows. Stay hidden, he commanded, then stepped into the open. Bow ready. Release her, he demanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. The scalers hissed their language incomprehensible to Mark. One lunged forward, a spear in hand. Mark dodged the thrust and countered with a strike from his bow, breaking the spear shaft. Another scaler attacked from behind, but Mark had anticipated the move. He spun, driving his hunting knife into the creature's thigh. The fight was chaotic, confined in the small space of the cave chamber. Mark was outnumbered, but moved with a precision born of years spent hunting on Xantos. One by one the scalers fell back, wounded but not fatally. The leader, the one Mark had shot with the arrow, snarled something that might have been a retreat order. The scalers fled, disappearing into the depths of the cave system. Mark rushed to the altar, cutting the ropes that bound Aya's mother. "We need to move," he said. "They'll return with reinforcements." Isla emerged from hiding, tears streaming down her face as she saw her mother. She's alive," Mark assured her, checking the woman's pulse. "Just unconscious. Help me." Together they carried the woman back through the cave toward the entrance. The storm still raged outside, but they couldn't afford to wait. They would have to brave the elements. As they reached the cave mouth, a rumble shook the mountain, not thunder but something deeper, more ominous. The ground beneath their feet trembled. "Quake," Mark muttered. Xantos was prone to seismic activity, especially in the mountain regions. They stumbled out into the storm, rain lashing at them as they sought a path down the mountainside. The quake intensified, rocks breaking loose and tumbling down the slopes. Around them, Mark spotted a ledge below that offered some protection from both the falling rocks and the worst of the rain. There, he'd pointed. "We need to reach that outcropping." Carrying the unconscious woman between them, they made their way carefully down the treacherous slope. The ground continued to shake, making each step hazardous. They had nearly reached the ledge when a massive boulder broke free above them, hurtling down directly in their path. "Jump," Mark shouted, pushing Aya and her mother toward safety. Aya made it to the ledge, pulling her mother with her. But as Mark leapt, the edge crumbled beneath his foot. He fell tumbling down the mountainside, unable to find purchase on the rain-slicked rocks. He slammed into an outcropping 20 ft below, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Pain lanced through his leg. Broken, most likely. Above, he could hear Aya calling his name, her voice thin against the storm's fury. "Stay there," he shouted back. "Keep your mother safe." The rain continued to fall as Mark assessed his situation. His leg was definitely broken, a clean break of the tibia. If he had to guess, he couldn't climb back up, and moving further down the mountain in this condition would be suicidal. He dragged himself beneath slight overhang, providing minimal shelter from the rain. From his pack, he retrieved a medkit, another colony relic, its contents depleted over the years but still useful. He fashioned a crude splint for his leg, gritting his teeth against the pain. As night fell, the storm gradually abated, leaving behind a sky washed clean, the single moon of Xantos casting its pale light over the mountains. Mark shivered in the cold, his clothes soaked through. He thought of Aya and her mother on the ledge above, hoping they had found better shelter. Movement to his right caught his attention, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness. Mark reached for his knife, only to find it missing. Lost in the fall, the figure approached cautiously, a scaler but not one of those from the cave. This one was older, its green skin lined with age, its movements deliberate. It stopped several feet from Mark, studying him with its 3 eyes. Human, it said in heavily accented but understandable speech. Why do you bleed on our mountain? Clears throat. Mark was surprised to hear his own language. You speak human, I learned from healer woman, the scaler replied. She teach words while tending our chief. The woman you kidnapped, Mark said, anger coloring his tone despite his precarious position. The scaler tilted its head. Not kidnap, ask help. She come willingly. This contradicted Aya's story, but Mark knew how easily fear could distort perception, especially in a child. She has a daughter who believes otherwise, small one with fire in her eyes. The scaler nodded. She hide when we come, think we take mother by force. The scaler's 3 eyes blinked in sequence. We ask healer woman help, say our chief die without her knowledge of plants. She agreed, but small one not see this. She run hide in forest. Mark considered this information. It made sense. A frightened child witnessing strangers taking her mother away would naturally assume the worst. Your chief is sick with the shaking sickness. Yes, many die already. The healer woman say it is virus. The scaler struggled with the unfamiliar word. Say it come from Metal Village. Long ago, Mark's suspicions were confirmed. Somehow the virus had spread beyond the colony, though in a form that affected the scalers differently than it had humans. The healer, where is she now? Above, the scaler pointed up the mountain with small one. We find them in storm. Take to warm place. Relief flooded through Mark. Isla and her mother were safe. And what about me? He asked. Will you take me to them or leave me here to die? The scaler considered him for a long moment. You fight well, protect healer woman. This is honorable. It extended a long 3-fingered hand. I help you, human. Then maybe you help us. Mark hesitated, then accepted the offered hand. Scaler pulled him upright, supporting his weight as Mark stood on his good leg. I am Ron, the scaler said, elder of Mount Inclin. Mark, he replied, last survivor of Hope Colony. Ron helped Mark up a path he hadn't noticed before. A narrow trail that wound around the side of the mountain rather than straight up its face. Despite his injured leg, Mark found the going easier with the scalers' assistance. Why does your clan need help? Mark asked as they climbed. Beyond the virus, I mean. Ron was silent for several steps. Sickness is only first problem. Land changes, hunt grows scarce, water turns bitter. He glanced at Mark. Elders say it began when Metal Village came. Mark frowned. The colony had conducted extensive environmental impact studies before settlement. Nothing had indicated that their presence would cause widespread ecological damage, but then they had missed the virus in the soil. What else might they have overlooked? They reached a series of caves higher up the mountain, these clearly inhabited scalar children, smaller versions of the adults, but with softer features, peered curiously at Mark before being ushered away by their elders. The caves were warm, heated by geothermal vents that released steam through cracks in the floor. Ron led Mark to a chamber deeper within the cave. System, there on a bed of furs lay Aya's mother, with Isla herself curled up asleep beside her. The woman was awake, her amber eyes finding Mark's as he entered. The ghost, she said softly, my daughter. Found you. Mark lowered himself carefully to sit near them, wincing as his injured leg protested the movement. She's brave, your daughter, the woman nodded. I am Sarah, healer of the river tribe. She studied his splinted leg. You're hurt, it will heal, Mark said dismissively. What matters is that you're both safe. Sarah's expression turned grave. Safe for now, but none of us will be safe if the sickness spreads. She gestured to Ron, show him. Scalar elder led Mark to an adjoining chamber where several of his people lay. On similar beds of fur, they trembled uncontrollably, their green skin pale and marked with blue lesions, the virus. Without question. How many? Mark asked. 12 dead, Ron replied. 23 sick, more each day. Mark moved closer to the nearest patient, examining the blue marks on their neck. They were identical to the lesions he had seen on the colonist 10 years ago. It's the same virus that killed my people, he confirmed. Healer woman say. You immune, Ron said. Say your blood might hold cure. Mark turned to him sharply. My blood. Sarah had followed them into the chamber. It's possible, she said, if you survived exposure, your body developed defenses against the virus. Those defenses might be transferred through blood. Mark remembered Sarah discussing similar theories in the early days of the outbreak. Convulsant plasma therapy, she had called it, but they had run out of time before they could test it. You think a transfusion would work? I think it's worth trying, Sarah said. These people will die otherwise, and if the virus spreads to other tribes. She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Mark looked at the suffering Scalars, then back at Sarah. How will we do it? You don't have the necessary equipment. Sarah smiled faintly. You underestimate what I've learned from your ruins, Ghost. I've studied the medical texts left behind, experimented with combining your techniques with our own. She gestured to a corner of the chamber where Mark was surprised to see salvaged colony medical equipment, primitive by Earth standards, but serviceable. You've been to the ruins? Mark asked, incredulous. No one approached the colony. It was taboo. Not I, Sarah clarified. Our scholars. They've studied your people's remains for years, learning what they could. Mark wasn't sure whether to be disturbed or impressed by this revelation. The thought of strangers moving through the place where his family and friends had died felt like a violation, and yet if their research could save lives now, I'll do it, he decided. But there's something else we need to address. How did the virus reach your people in the first place? It was contained to the colony site. Ron and Sarah exchanged a look. Show him, Sarah said. The Scalar led them deeper into the cave system, to a chamber that opened onto a sheer cliff face. From this vantage point, Mark could see down into a valley on the far side of the mountain, a valley he hadn't known existed. What he saw there made his blood run cold. A second human colony ship, partially buried in the earth but unmistakable. Another ship, he whispered. When 2 moons ago, Ron said. Fall from sky with great fire. Few survive crash. They die of sickness soon after. A rescue mission. Mark realized Earth had finally sent help a decade too late, and they had brought the virus with them. Or rather, They had been infected upon landing. Just as the first colonists had been. We need to go there, Mark said. There might be survivors, and there will definitely be supplies we can use, medicines that could help your sick. Ron nodded. When sun rises, we go to Metal Bird. Now you give blood to help my people. The blood transfusion was primitive by colony standards but effective. Mark watched as his blood flowed through improvised tubing into the arm of the scalar chief, a massive individual whose tremors had subsided into occasional twitches. The process was repeated with several of the most critically ill patients. It will take time to know if it works, Sarah explained as she removed the needle from Mark's arm. But it's the best hope we have. As she worked, Mark found himself studying her, the concentration in her amber eyes, the gentle precision of her movements. She was beautiful in a way he hadn't allowed himself to notice in women since Sarah's death. The realization made him uncomfortable, and he looked away, exhausted from blood loss in the day's events. Mark fell into a deep sleep on the furs provided by the scalars. He dreamed of Sarah and Eliza, but for the first time in years, the dreams weren't painful. Instead, he saw them smiling, approving of what he was doing. He woke to find Aya sitting beside him, watching him with solemn eyes. You talk in your sleep, she said. Who is Eliza? Mark sat up slowly. My daughter, he replied, surprising himself with his willingness to answer. She died when the sickness came. Aya nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. Mother says you're helping the scalars fight the sickness, that you're giving them your blood. I'm trying, Mark said. Sometimes the best way to fight your own pain is to help others with theirs. Aya considered this. Is that why you helped me find my mother? Because of Eliza? Mark looked away, uncomfortable with the child's perception. Maybe, he admitted. You reminded me of her. Aya touched his hand. Think she would be proud of you. The simplicity of the statement struck Mark deeply. Would Eliza be proud of what he had become? The silent, solitary ghost of the ruins? Or would she be disappointed that he had cut himself off from life for so long? Ron is waiting, Aya said, changing the subject. He says the sun is up and it's time to go to the Metal Bird. The journey to the crash site took most of the day. Ron led the way with Mark following. Despite his injured leg, which Sarah had responded more effectively, Isla had insisted on accompanying them while Sarah remained behind to monitor the transfusion patients. As they approached the valley, Mark saw evidence of the crash, a long gouge in the earth where the ship had skidded to a halt. Unlike the carefully planned landing of the Hope Colony vessel, this had been an emergency crash landing. The ship itself was smaller than the original colony vessel, a rescue craft rather than full colonization ship. Its hull was breached in multiple places, but the main structure remained intact. Stay back, Mark warned as they drew closer. If the virus is present, it could be concentrated around the ship. Ron relayed the warning to the small group of scalars who had accompanied them. They spread out, maintaining a safe distance while Mark approached the vessel alone. The main airlock was partially open, jammed in position by the crash. Mark squeezed through, entering the darkened interior of the ship. Emergency lighting still functioned, casting a dim red glow through the quarters. The scene inside was grim. Bodies slumped at workstations in corridors, evidence of the virus's swift work. Mark moved through the ship methodically, checking For survivors, though he expected to find none. In the ship's medical bay, he struck gold supplies untouched, including medications that might help treat the symptoms of the virus. He gathered as much as he could carry, storing it in a salvaged container. As he turned to leave, a flashing light on one of the consoles caught his attention. The ship's communication system was still operational, attempting to establish contact with someone. Mark approached cautiously, activating the console toll. A recorded message played, the voice distorted but understandable. Rescue mission Horizon to Hope Colony. We have lost contact with Earth. Situation critical. Multiple colony ships launched, seeking confirmation of viable settlement. Please respond. The message continued after a burst of static. This is the third rescue attempt. Previous missions failed to establish contact. Earth resources depleted. Global conditions deteriorating. This may be humanity's final diaspora. Message repeats in 15 minutes. Multiple ships. The implications hit Mark like a physical blow. Earth had sent not one but several rescue missions over the years, perhaps to different potential colony sites, and they had lost contact with Earth. Something had happened back home. Something catastrophic enough to launch a desperate diaspora. He needed to respond to warn the other ships about the virus before they landed and suffered the same fate. But the communication system was damaged, its range limited to near orbit transmissions unless another ship came within range of Xantos. His warning would go unheard. Mark downloaded the ship's logs onto a portable drive, another piece of salvage tech, and completed his search of the vessel. He found no survivors as expected, but gathered additional supplies that would be useful. Tools, clothing preserved, food, water purification tablets. When he emerged from the ship, Ron and the others were waiting at a safe distance. No survivors, Mark reported, but I found medicines that might help your sick. They made their way back to the scalar settlement. As afternoon faded into evening, Mark's mind was occupied with the implications of the ship's message. Humanity might be scattered across multiple worlds now, fighting for survival. The thought that he might not be the last human alive, that others might have established viable colonies elsewhere, gave him a strange sense of hope. Upon returning to the caves, they found Sarah waiting with remarkable news. The transfusions appeared to be working. The scalar chief was awake and coherent, his tremors gone. Others who had received Mark's blood were showing similar improvement. It's not a cure, Sarah cautioned, but it's buying us time to develop one. That night, as the scalars celebrated the chief's recovery, Mark sat apart watching the festivities. With mixed emotions, he had helped save lives today. Scalar lives, yes, but lives nonetheless. It was the first time in 10 years he had felt truly useful, truly connected to something beyond mere survival. Sarah found him there, offering a cup of the scalar's fermented fruit drink. You saved many today, she said, sitting beside him. My people call you a hero now, not a ghost. Mark shook his head. I'm no hero. I couldn't save my own people, yet you tried to save mine, Sarah countered. That counts for something. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the celebration. Isla told me about your daughter, Sarah said. Finally, and your wife. Mark tensed, but found the expected pain was duller than it had been. Sarah was a doctor like you, a healer. She tried everything to stop the virus. She would be proud of what you did today, Sarah said softly. Echoing her daughter's words, Mark turned to look at her, really looking at her. In the firelight, her amber skin seemed to glow, her eyes reflecting the flames. Your daughter is a lot like you, he said, brave, determined. Sarah smiled. She's stronger than I was. At her age, when her father died, I thought I would break, but she gave me reason to continue. She said it was a hunting accident. A shadow crossed Sarah's face. Yes, the Thunderfoot you encountered in the forest, one killed him 3 seasons ago. Mark felt a pang of empathy. They had both lost spouses to the dangers of Xanthos, Sarah to the virus, Sarah's husband to one of its fearsome predators. I'm sorry, he said. Simply, life on Xanthos has always been a balance between beauty and danger. Sarah replied, we accept both. She studied him for a moment. What will you do now? Ghost, return to your ruins. The question caught Mark off guard. He hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis. The prospect of returning to his solitary existence in the ruins of hope suddenly seemed hollow, and yet the thought of something else, something more, was terrifying in its own way. I don't know, he admitted. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her touch gentle but firm. There are other paths, if you're willing to see them. The next morning they prepared to depart the Scalar settlement. The chief, now fully recovered, presented Mark with a ceremonial knife, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Ron accompanied them to the edge of Scalar territory, where he and Mark clasped forearms in farewell. You welcome on mountain always last. Human, Ron said. I may take you up on that, Mark replied. There's more to learn from the crash ship. The journey back to the river Trib's village was longer but less urgent than their outward journey had been. They followed the river downstream, Sarah pointing out medicinal plants along the way, sharing her knowledge freely with both Mark and Aya. Mark found himself absorbing the information with genuine interest. Sarah would have been fascinated by the native pharmacopoeia, the plants that could reduce fever, ease pain, promote healing. He thought of the colony's medical database, still intact in the ruins of hope. Combined with Sarah's traditional knowledge, it could form the basis of a new medical science. As they traveled, Mark noticed a subtle shift in his interactions with Sarah. What had begun as mutual respect was developing into something more. Their conversations extended beyond medicinal plans to personal stories, dreams, fears. Sarah spoke of her life before becoming the Trib's healer, of her hopes for Aya's future. Mark, to his surprise, found himself sharing memories of Earth, of the early days of the colony, even of Sarah and Eliza, memories he had kept locked away for a decade. Each time he mentioned Sarah's name, a pang of guilt followed. He caught himself watching Sarah's amber eyes, the grace of her movements, and quickly looked away. It felt like betrayal, this whisper of attraction. After years of devotion to a ghost, you still love her very much, Sarah observed one evening as they rested by a stream. Her voice held no jealousy, only understanding. Mark looked up. How did your voice changes when you speak of her, Sarah said simply. It softens like touching something precious. Mark was silent for a long moment. It feels wrong, he admitted. Finally, to be here alive when she isn't, to feel anything beyond grief. We have a saying in my tribe, Sarah replied, "The dead walk beside us, not behind us. They don't want us to follow them into darkness. They want to accompany us into light." The words resonated somewhere deep in Mark's soul, touching a truth he had been afraid to acknowledge. Aya observed these exchanges with knowing eyes, occasionally finding excuses to walk ahead, giving the adults privacy to talk. Once Mark caught her smiling to herself after Sarah had laughed at something he said, a sound that had made his heart skip in a way he'd forgotten was possible. "She's playing matchmaker," Sarah whispered, noticing the same thing. "STLE, isn't she?" Mark felt heat rise to his face. "Children see what they want to see, and sometimes," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting his, "they see what adults are too afraid to acknowledge." They reached the River Trib's village on the third day. It was a collection of dome-shaped dwellings nestled in a clearing by the river, surrounded by cultivated fields and orchards. The villagers emerged to greet them, embracing Sarah and Aya with obvious relief and joy. They regarded Mark with cautious curiosity. The legendary ghost-made flesh. The village elder, a woman whose amber skin was lined with age, approached Mark. "The Silent One has found his voice," she said, her words translated by Sarah, "and we are grateful." That night the River Tribe held a feast in honor of Sarah's return and Mark's role in her rescue. Mark Clear's throat sat uncomfortably as the focus of attention, listening as Aya recounted their adventure to the Rap villagers, her narrative growing more elaborate with each telling. "She says you fought 10 Thunderfoot with your bare hands," Sarah murmured, sitting beside him, "and killed a sky serpent with a single arrow through its eye." Mark chuckled. "Only one Thunderfoot, and the sky serpent got away." "Don't spoil her story," Sarah admonished with a smile. "Heroes are important in difficult times." As the celebration wound down, Mark found himself standing at the edge of the village, looking up at the night sky. The stars were different here than they had been on Earth, the constellations unfamiliar. Somewhere up there, other colony ships might be seeking new homes, carrying the remnants of humanity to distant worlds. "Thinking of leaving already?" Sarah's voice came from behind him. Mark turned. "Old habits." Sarah moved to stand beside him, following his gaze upward. "You could stay, you know, not just visit." "Stay and do what?" "Be your village's pet. Human, be a part of something again." Sarah countered. "Help us understand the sickness, prevent it from spreading. Share what you know, learn what we know." She paused. "Live rather than just survive." The words struck a chord in Mark. For 10 years he had merely existed, a ghost haunting the ruins of his past. The thought of having a purpose again, of belonging somewhere, was both appealing and terrifying. "I'm not sure I remember how," he admitted. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her touch gentle but firm. "You can learn, just as you learned to survive on Xantos." Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. Without thinking, Mark leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a tentative kiss. Sarah responded, her hand rising to rest against his cheek. When they parted, Mark felt a strange mixture of emotions: guilt at this unexpected connection, fear of what it might mean, but also a warmth he had thought forever lost to him. "I shouldn't have done that," he said quietly, stepping back. "I'm sorry." Sarah's eyes held his, gentle but unwavering. "Why not?" Sarah, he began but couldn't continue. "Would Want you to be alone forever, Sarah asked. Is that the kind of love she gave you? Mark shook his head slowly. No, she would have. He took a deep breath. She would have wanted me to live, but it's been so long since I've let myself feel anything except survival and guilt. Then perhaps it's time, Sarah said, not pushing, not retreating, not to forget her, but to honor her by living as she would have wanted you to. Mark looked up at the stars, so different from Earth's constellations, yet equally beautiful. I need time, he said honestly. Sarah nodded. Time we have. The future isn't going anywhere. In that moment, Mark thought of Sarah and Eliza again. What would they want? For him to spend the rest of his life alone guarding their memory, or to honor them by living fully, by using what he had learned to help others, by allowing himself to feel again. I'll try, he said finally. No promises beyond that. Sarah smiled. That's all anyone can ask. The next morning, Mark rose early and slipped away from the village. But he wasn't leaving, not permanently. He had decided to return to the ruins of Hope one last time to gather what useful supplies and information remained, particularly from the medical databases. As he approached the colony, the familiar sight of the crumbling structures no longer filled him with the same sense of loss. Instead, he saw it with new eyes as a resource, a bridge between his past and a possible future. Inside what had once been the main research facility, Mark activated the emergency power system. The colony's computers hummed to life, their displays flickering in the dim light. He began downloading medical data, agricultural research, and technological schematics, knowledge that could benefit both himself and the River Tribe. As he worked, he allowed himself to walk through the colony one last time, saying goodbye to the ghost that had kept him company for so long. In the dwelling he had shared with Sarah and Eliza, he gathered a few personal items, a family photo preserved in a protective case, Sarah's journal, Eliza's favorite stuffed animal. By midday he had collected everything of value he could carry. Standing at the colony gates, he looked back at what had been humanity's first and failed attempt to settle Xantos. Goodbye, he said simply, then turned and began the journey back to the River Tribe's village, back to Aya, to Sarah, to the possibility of a new beginning. He wasn't the last human anymore, not really. Somewhere among the stars, others of his kind might be building new colonies, facing their own challenges. And here on Xantos he had found something unexpected, not just survival, but the chance to live again. As he walked, Mark realized he was smiling, a real smile, perhaps his first in 10 years. The path ahead would not be easy. The virus still posed a threat, and bridging the gap between human science and native wisdom would take time. But for the first time since the fall of Hope, he looked to the future with something other than dread. When he returned to the village, he found Sarah waiting at its edge, as if she had known he would return. Beside her stood Aya, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. You came back, Isla said, relief evident in her voice. I promised I would, Mark replied, ruffling her hair. Sarah's eyes met his, a question in them. In answer, Mark set down his pack and pulled out Sarah's medical journal. I thought you might find this useful, he said, handing it to her. It's a beginning. Sarah understood the gesture for what it was, not just the sharing of knowledge, but a commitment to start something new. Her fingers brushed his as she took the Journal, a good beginning, she agreed, her eyes holding a promise of patience. Isla looked between them, a hopeful smile spreading across her face. Does this mean you're staying with us now? Mark glanced at Sarah, then back to the expectant child. Yes, he said, I'm staying. The silent ghost had found his voice, and with it a new purpose, a new path forward, and perhaps in time a new home, not to replace what was lost, but to build something different, something that honored the past while embracing what might yet be.